Hello, how are you? Chevre. I hope everyone is gesund, stark und freilich, begashmis und beruchnis. Healthy, strong, and happy physically and spiritually. Und Rebbe soll helfen, dass die alle Yidden, was davon geholfen werden, in ושרי sollen nicht sein, sie im Bonne, Chaim, Mizöni, sollen geholfen werden, taken from Yad, Mamish, Betevan, Rebanigle. Anyone who needs to be helped in any way whatsoever should be helped in a way of revealed good. We are now going to speak the thought for the week of Parshas Devarim, and today we are going to continue on a theme that we started last week, which was about selflessness and selfishness. We'll start with the pasuk from the Rebbe's new kapitel, pasuk Kuf Yud Dalet of kapitel Kuf Yud Tes. Sisri Yomagini Oto Lidvarcha Yicholti. I think we once spoke about this. David HaMelech calls out to Hashem, and he says, "You are my refuge and my shield. I place hope in your words." So this is a pasuk which expresses David HaMelech's humility. He acknowledges that without Hashem's help, he's lost. His only refuge, his sense of safety and security are in Hashem's hands. And he lives and he hopes only in Hashem's words. In Parshas Devarim, this week is the first Parsha of the sefer Devarim, and it's a very, very interesting sefer in particular because it's all about the words that Moshe Rabbeinu speaks to the Yidden. We can call it his farewell address. He farbrengs with the Bnei Yisrael that he loves so awesomely, and before his istalkus, before his passing on, he wants to review the situation, reassess the past 40 years, and discuss where we went wrong and where we made our mistakes. As the previous Rebbe said many times, the past is a teacher for the present and the future. We have to learn from our mistakes. And that's the content of the whole sefer, and it starts this week. So, Moshe Rabbeinu is talking to the Yidden, and he starts telling them Hashem's words and what happened at different places as he's discussing the past. So the pasuk says that the Eibishter spoke to them, Hashem Elokeinu diber aleinu b'chayrev, leimar rav lachem sheves b'hor hazeh. In verse 6, pasuk Vav, it says that Hashem spoke to us in Chayrev, that means by Mount Sinai, and he said, rav lachem sheves b'hor hazeh. You spent enough time dwelling here, now it's time to move on. As the next pasuk continues, Pnu usu lachem, which means turn yourselves and journey. So Rashi says something over here, which I'll soon say, and so too in the next pasuk, there's also a Rashi, which brings out a similar point. In this place, it doesn't say it so clearly. On this pasuk where it says, Rav lachem sheves, you spent much time at the mountain, Rashi says that there's a medrsh Agada that says, הרבה גדולה לכם, ושכר על ישיבתכם בהר הזה. Much greatness came to the Jewish people, was achieved here at this mountain. And then Rashi says, עשיתם משכן מנורה וכלים, קבלתם תורה. Here's where you receive the Torah and other great events that happened there. So what does Rashi tell us? Rav lachem, you, the nation, achieved greatness. Where? At Sinai. And primarily, we received the Torah there. Why was Sinai chosen? Everyone knows the famous Medrash. Why was Mount Sinai chosen over all the other mountains? Because it's mach mikol turya, it's the lowest of the mountains. In other words, humility. God resides in the humble place. The next pasuk, right after this pasuk about Rav lachem sheves, it starts off Pnu, you should start your journey, and then it says Avoy hara amayri vel kol shchenu ba'arava b'hara v'shvela v'negev v'chef hayom eretz hakrani v'alvonim. We're not going to translate, you'll see it yourself. And then he says Ad hanoir hagodil nahar pros, until you will come to the Canaanite land and Lebanon, until the great river Nahar Pros. This was a river that bordered on the land of Eretz Yisrael. Rashi says, what does it mean, the great river? Nahar HaGodol. And he says, mפני שנזכר im Eretz Yisrael, because this river was mentioned next to the land of Israel, koire Gdol, therefore it's called great. In other words, the greatness of this river is that it borders on Israel. Not because of the river itself, but because of its connection to Eretz Yisrael. And he says, Moshel Hedyet Omer, and he says the common saying is, Eved Melech, Melech. The slave of a king is a king. The subject of the king, because of his association and total nullification to the king, then he becomes a king. He gets king powers. And he brings another verse saying, connected to this, Karav Lagabi Dihina Va'adheim. Come into contact with one who is anointed and become anointed yourself. So here we see this tremendous attribute of humility. When you are connected to something which is greater than you, then you truly become great. It's a very sad state in society today that people look at humility as a flaw. I would say it's the most underrated virtue. And it's because Western psychology associate humility with being constricted, with low self-esteem, not being aware of one's talents and qualities. And Hasidic Torah, Hasidic doctrine teaches us the opposite is true. Now's not the time to elaborate, but Hasidus discusses how humility means a person who's totally self-aware of all his talents and of all his qualities and all his capabilities. He has a healthy self-awareness and a positive self-esteem, and nevertheless, he's completely humble because he recognizes that they were God-given abilities, etc. That's the key to understanding the concept of humility in Hasidic thought. That humility is not a contradiction to honesty. You can be totally honest and aware of who you are with all your qualities, and it's no contradiction whatsoever to humility. And on the contrary, humility is the key to growth, to greatness. This is what we see from both of these psukim. Rav lachem, greatness came to you at Sinai because of Sinai's humility. Nahara Godel, great river, because of its association to Israel. So in other words, this is a message in our service of Hashem. When we nullify ourselves, when we are humble, Eved Melech, then Melech, then you achieve true greatness. So, for lack of better words, we could say humility is vulnerability. Humility means receptivity. Humility means being open for suggestions, for growth, for change. And that's why the truth is, according to Chassidic thought, without question, humility is the key to all spiritual development. It begins with humility. There's a story, a famous story that the previous Rebbe said, and the Rebbe repeated, but the Rebbe added some twist to it. And the story goes that there was a group of Hasidim, and they were farbrengen. As Hasidim are wont to farbreng, they drank a bit of vodka, sang l'chaim, and they spoke about deep concepts of God and creation and time and space, and how God creates the world constantly. And the main point of all of Chassidus and all of Chassidic way of life is to come to the conclusion and a very powerful consciousness of God is everything. So there was a group of Chassidim in Russia, they were farbrengen, and the farbrengen ended and they were going to their homes. So the group that went from the farbrengen into the streets, they were so taken by this farbrengen that they were very boisterous and noisy and singing and dancing and making noise. So there was a policeman in Tsarist Russia. There was a policeman, and you could understand in those days, if you saw a policeman coming towards you, you were quaking in your boots because they could just pick you up and throw you into jail and who knows what. It was a serious matter. So there's a policeman who heard this group of Chassidim dancing, so he started walking towards them, and he calls out loudly with an authoritative voice, and he says, Shh, K'tor Idiyot. K'tor Idiyot means, who goes there? And the chassid answered, one of the chassidim of the group says, Bitul Idiyot, Bitul Goes. And the policeman saw that these people were like elevated, they were like in a different world. They were living some sort of higher awareness, so he let them go. That's the story. Now the point is, the Rebbe says in one place, that the chassid had to answer truthfully. And at that point, when the policeman asked him, who goes? He was so enamored, so permeated, so infused with this idea of a higher reality, of a deeper reality, that he was enveloped by that reality of godliness. So when he was asked, who goes? He said, Bitul goes. Bitul means self-nullification. Like nobody goes. Because he's nobody. Because the only thing that exists and the only reality is God. But you could say from this story that we learn from this, Bitul Idiyot, Bitul goes. When you're a nobody, when you're transparent, when you're able to be flexible, that's how you really flow. That's how you really will gain greatness. That's how you'll really get far. And the truth is, one of the most famous Menoras Al brought down in Chassidus is that we talk about God, we say, in the place where you find God's true greatness, you find his ability to lower himself, his ability to be humble. So in other words, true greatness involves specifically humility. And the Rebbe once said a meaning of the verse, Mi Yakum Yaakov Ki Kotenhu. The little translation is, we're talking about the Jewish nation, and we say, Mi Yakum Yaakov Ki Kotenhu. How will Yaakov, the nation, rise? They're so small, they're so tiny. And the Rebbe said the true interpretation and meaning is, Mi Yakum Yaakov. How will Yaakov rise? How does Yaakov become strong? How does Yaakov become great? Ki Kotenhu, because he's small, because we are humble. The Jewish nation has the trait of humility. And this is the secret to our success. It is our humility connected to a higher power, a higher authority. We connect to infinity, and this gives us the utmost abilities. So in the 9 days, and before Tisha B'Av, we have to think about this concept of humility on every level. Between man and man, humility means your sense of seeing the divinity in the other person and respecting it. Humility means you're open to listen to what another person tells you. Ben Adam l'chavere. And so too, Ben Adam l'makim. We open ourselves more and more to the Gadlus HaKel. And if we practice this trait of humility, there's no question about it, that this will bring the Gula Mitzvah Shlema, take it from Yad, Mamish. Posting from my home, Be'ez Hashem Yisbarach, your man in Melbourne.